Here is the most famous closing line in American literature. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Everyone assigns that line to J. Gatsby, to his longing, his green light, his doomed reach for Daisy. But read it again. We beat on. That's Nick Carraway talking, not Gatsby. Nick. And once you hear that, once you understand whose voice carries the final sentence, the entire novel rearranges itself. The standard reading of The Great Gatsby goes something like this. A self-made man destroys himself, chasing the woman who represents everything money promised and can't deliver. It's about the American dream, the green light, the billboard eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg watching over a moral wasteland. And all of that is in the novel. But it's not what the novel is doing. What the novel is doing is something more uncomfortable, and it lives entirely inside Nick Carraway's voice. Nick opens the book with a declaration that should stop us cold. He tells us his father gave him one piece of advice: reserve all judgments. Then he tells us he is inclined to reserve all judgments. Inclined to, not that he does. And then he spends 180 pages constructing the most elaborate, lyrical, emotionally invested judgment of another human being in 20th century fiction. Nick doesn't withhold judgment about Gatsby. He renders judgment in the highest possible register by turning a bootlegger from North Dakota into a Greek hero. Think about what Nick actually knows. He lives next door to Gatsby for one summer. They share a handful of conversations. Gatsby tells him a self-serving autobiography that Nick initially doesn't believe. And from this, from proximity and a few parties and one car ride, where Gatsby, name, drops Oxford, Nick builds a myth. He calls Gatsby great. Not ironically, not in scare quotes. He means it. The question the novel is quietly asking is, why does Nick need to mean it? Look at what surrounds Nick. He has come east from the Midwest, from a family of moderate inherited wealth, to work in bonds, a profession he describes with total indifference. He dates Jordan Baker and cannot commit. He attends parties where he knows almost no one. He has one friend, the word he gives Gatsby on almost no evidence. And his emotional life, such as it is, unfolds entirely through observation. Nick watches. That is his primary activity in this novel. He watches Gatsby with an intensity he never directs at Jordan, at his work, at his own interior. The only time Nick comes alive on the page is when he is describing someone else's desire. Fitzgerald knew what he was doing. There's a scene, brief, easily missed, where Nick describes Gatsby's smile. He says it was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it, that it understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you, as you would like to believe in yourself. That is not how you describe an acquaintance. That is how you describe someone who has filled a vacancy you didn't know you carried. Nick isn't chronicling Gatsby. He is falling into him. And the narration reflects this. Gatsby's parties are baroque and shimmering under Nick's pen, because Nick needs them to be. Daisy's voice is full of money, but that's Nick's metaphor, Nick's ear turning her into a symbol. Tom Buchanan is brutish and careless, but that's Nick refusing complexity to the man who represents everything ordinary that Gatsby transcends. Every character in the novel is sculpted by Nick's need for Gatsby to matter. The question isn't whether Gatsby is great. It's what happens to a man who can only feel by reflecting someone else's passion. This is where the novel becomes something more than social criticism. Gatsby wanted Daisy. That is simple, even if it's destructive. But Nick wants something harder to name. He wants to believe that wanting itself, pure, irrational, magnificent wanting, is enough to ennoble a life. He needs Gatsby's romantic obsession to be beautiful because his own life contains no obsession at all. Nick is the man without a green light. And Gatsby, for one summer, let him stand close enough to someone else's to feel the warmth. After Gatsby dies, Nick does something extraordinary. He erases a profanity scrawled on Gatsby's steps. He arranges a funeral almost no one attends. He cuts off Jordan. He leaves New York. And then he writes this book, because the only way to keep Gatsby alive is to keep narrating him. The novel we are reading is Nick's green light. It is his reaching, his refusal to let go, his insistence that one summer and one man and one quality of yearning were enough to organize an entire life around. Fitzgerald gave us a novel about an unreliable narrator who is unreliable not because he lies, but because he loves. Nick inflates Gatsby because deflation would mean that the one summer he felt something was ordinary, and he can't survive ordinary. None of us can. That's why the final line isn't about Gatsby at all. It's about everyone who has ever built a story around a feeling they had once and refused to let it be small. So we beat on. Not Gatsby. We. Nick. You. The boats that keep returning to the only current that ever pulled them forward. Fitzgerald's greatest trick wasn't making us pity Gatsby. It was making us miss the narrator standing in the dark, reaching for a light that was never his.